Yeah, just bear with me as I let everyone into the room. Thanks.
Woo, I can see people. That's great.
You in? You good?
I'm in. I am in.
Perfect.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, everyone. We had some technical difficulties this morning, so we're excited to see Stephanie.
I did. This is why it's always good to try getting on at least 15 minutes early because it's been all of 16 minutes trying to get on with y'all. All right.
Perfect. And we're so excited to see all of you today. Again, I'm just giving everyone a couple minutes to get settled and to get into the Zoom call. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Hope everyone is having a great Thursday morning. It's sunny over here, so it's nice. Okay, it's 11:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Estep, and I am a wellness coordinator for Healthy UNCG, which is our employee wellness initiative at UNCG. Thank you so much for being here on our second week as we are doing our virtual wellness series for fall. Today, we have a presentation on communication and setting boundaries brought to you by our wonderful director, Stephanie. We also have our other wellness coordinator, Monica, on the call, who will also be monitoring the chat with us. Feel free to put anything in the chat. This is going to be kind of interactive, so there will be some questions, or unmute your mic. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat, throw them my way or Monica's way. And yeah, we're so thankful to have you guys here, and I will kick it off to Steph.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Hey, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you. Like Kristen said, I'm Stephanie. I'm the director of Healthy UNCG. Probably if you're in this room, you're familiar with Healthy UNCG, but if you aren't, we are the Employee Wellness Initiative for the university. So we offer programs like this on a variety of health and wellness topics. We also have group fitness, a fitness learning library option. We offer access to different resources, whether that be health coaching, nutrition counseling, connection with EAP or ComPsych. So there's a variety of things that kind of fall under our umbrella, and we encourage you to check out our website, which I'll share at the end of the presentation, if you want to get a better idea of what we do and what we offer. Oh, Kristen threw it up there. Awesome. Well, last week, if you missed it, we started off our fall wellness series with Amber Reed. Amber Reed is a qualified mental health professional, and she talked a lot about just signs and things to look out for when it comes to our own mental health issues or mental health crisis we might be having, signs and strategies that we can look for in coworkers or family members. So if you missed that, I encourage you to go to our website. That video link is up, and we will also be posting the handouts and resources. I don't think they are up yet, but we'll be posting all the material that she shared, or you can always just email us and we can forward it to you. I'm going to continue that a little bit today with talking about communications and boundaries in the workplace. And then next week, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about mindful movement as we age, as we go throughout life, more like that functional movement. And some of the topics might feel a little disjointed. And really, in some ways, they all will be connected in some way. Obviously, movement, caretaking, which will be later in October, what Amber talked about last week, what I'm talking about this week, it will all be connected in the sense that all of those things play a role into our own physical, mental, emotional well-being. But the topics are requested by you. So the way that we came up with this month, which is our Employee Wellness Month, the series, the 4 weeks, is we looked at all of our surveys and feedback from last year, and we picked the 4 most requested topics. And so that's sort of if you're wondering, why we're going from mental health, the boundaries to movement to caregiving. That's where it came from. So take a look at our website. You can look at some of those sessions. We will always be recording them. So if you do miss it, or you have a meeting, or you just don't have time, you can come back and catch the replay later. And again, we'll share any materials that we have too. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I will be presenting, pretty informally. So if you all have questions, you can obviously use the chat, and Monica or Kristen will let me know if they see anything in there, or you can just unmute yourself and stop me. That's fine too. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. All right. So you already know a little bit about who we are. So I'll skip past that and we'll move on. Actually, I'm going to move on my screen. You all are right where my presentation notes. So let me move you all over. Okay. Let's begin. Okay. Sorry, I'm having all types of trouble this morning. Okay, so let's start by just giving a little glimpse on where we are now in terms of working through a global pandemic and how that might have kind of changed a little bit about the types of communication and boundary setting that we knew pre-2020 and post or current. There's a research center called the Pew Research Center. They're a great website to check out. They do lots of all different types of research, but particularly in the workplace. And they did a study back in May, and they found that a little over half of people still wish to stay home even after the pandemic. And so they looked a little further at those who were at home, what their reasons were, and those that had returned, what stressors they were having. And they found that of those that had come back to work in some capacity, whether that's completely full time back in the office, maybe doing a couple of days in the office and a couple of days at home, out of those groups that were returning back to the office, 94% were reporting higher levels of work-related stress. And that's not to mention, Amber gave us some numbers last week in regards to mental health throughout the pandemic. So when the people at the Pew Research Center asked about contributing factors, so what is it that's contributing to your stress? Why are you feeling so anxious and stressed about, coming back to the workplace? What's around that? They found that one of the biggest factors was unclear expectations and just the lack of clarity and sort of not knowing anymore, like what the boundaries are and when are people working and when is it okay, and to reach out to someone, or how do I talk to my supervisor about needing a flexible schedule or wanting to, have some sort of hybrid schedule. And so that alone was causing a lot of stress, in addition to just the stress that, the pandemic was causing, or things that are happening in our world outside of the pandemic. So it's important, as whether you're in the office, whether you're at home, whether you're doing a mix of both, it's important to learn how to establish healthy boundaries because it factors into having a healthy life. And so when we do that, it sort of helps to ensure that what we do for a living, what we're doing now until we retire, or maybe post, won't continue to negatively impact our life. And this can be even harder, I think, as we adjust back. So today we're going to be talking more about those work and professional type boundaries. But as we go through this, and I kept thinking a lot of this applies to just even our personal boundaries that we have in every relationship in life, whether that be at home or at work. So before we get started, I just want to define the terms a little bit that we're going to be using today. When I talk about boundaries today, I'm just talking about guidelines, really. So boundaries in the sense that these are sort of your own personal set of rules that you create to identify what's safe for you, what's reasonable, what are permissible ways for people to act and talk and speak around you. And not only that, but then this is the part that I think a lot of us don't think about when it comes to boundaries. And I was talking to my coworkers in my office yesterday, and I said, it's always kind of tough for me to do this type of presentation because this is an area that I deeply struggle into. So I'm kind of learning alongside with you as I present this. But the second piece is one that I think we often forget when it comes to boundaries. And it's not just, identifying these sets of rules and communicating those, but it's also coming up with how we're going to respond or what we're going to do when someone kind of kind of steps outside those limits and does come into that space where you've set that boundary. How will you respond? So for me, the easiest way to sometimes think about a boundary is like a property line, like you see in the picture here. So there's like a clear no trespassing sign, and that sends a pretty clear signal, right? So if you violate that boundary, there's going to be some sort of consequence, right? And this is something that's very easy to see. Oftentimes you can see what's beyond that fence. Like in this picture, you can see it maybe looks like there's some construction going on. So, there's danger that lies ahead in that. But I think with personal boundaries, sometimes that can be a little bit harder to define and to understand because most of us aren't walking around with a fence and a no trespassing sign in front of us all day long, although we might want that during, COVID times. But those lines are invisible and they change. They can change based on what's happening in the world, what's happening in our personal life, what the body and the brain does once those boundaries have been violated. And so they're unique to each individual. And I think that makes it even harder to kind of think through and define some of those things. So we'll try to help with some of that today. I could not fit everything in today that I wanted to, or we would have been together all afternoon. And while I would have loved that, I'm sure you have other things that y'all want to get to. So I will be sending you all a lot of detailed kind of handouts and information. So if you want to go a little deeper into this, you can look further into it. Okay, so we already talked about personal boundaries, but another way to think about it is just like that no trespassing sign. That those personal boundaries, they define where you end and where others begin. And this little graphic I thought is kind of cute because it kind of shows that our boundaries, our personal boundaries, they're sort of determined by the amount of physical and emotional space that we allow between others. So, sometimes you hear people say, you're in my bubble, and that might be thinking about physical space, but it can also be that space that we don't see, which are those emotions, your thoughts, and your feeling. And so when you start thinking about your personal boundaries, it can help you decide, what kind of communication, what kind of behavior or interactions, what's acceptable to you. So in thinking about the kinds of boundaries, there's a lot of different types of boundaries. And today we're just going to be talking in general, about boundaries as a whole. But when you think about them, most of the time they fall into one of the 6 categories, either physical, emotional, mental, your time and the energy that you give, material, or spiritual. But in thinking about all 6 of those, these are kind of the kinds of boundaries or rules that we'll often see. You'll either see very rigid boundaries or rules, clear boundaries or rules, and some that are a little more fuzzy. They're not quite as clear as they could be. So when you think about these, which of these, and you can put it in the chat or you can unmute, which of these do you find most frustrating? And you can take a minute, kind of look through those definitions a bit, and we'll go into them in a minute. But when you think about a boundary that someone sets for you, or a type of rule, or that you come in contact with, which of these frustrate you the most, and why is that?
So we have fuzzy, couple answers for fuzzy. Yeah, couple answers for fuzzy, Lord. Fuzzy is the most frustrating. Okay. Rigid, because it's hard to understand without reason.
Good. These are right. And actually, I hadn't had a chance to look through the chat yet. And I'm seeing before about, some of the comments people were making about, you just couldn't wait to get back in the office and you missed that interaction, but it's just not the same. Or people keep their doors closed more. And I agree with that. And we talked about that a little bit last week about even just the body language that people have. Sometimes you don't see it now. So before, if I was in my office and Kristen was coming in the morning, and she might not even walk in my office, but I can kind of maybe see see into her office or see as she walks past. And I can notice if she's having a bad day, maybe by the way she's walking or her face. But now I think with being distanced, doors being closed, people naturally wanting to protect themselves more, and understandably, we sometimes miss that interaction. So I agree with what you all wrote earlier in the chat, and how that adds an extra layer of lack of communication and a little more lack of clarity around what boundaries are and what they mean for people now. So back to what you find most frustrating. A lot of you said fuzzy and rigid, and you're right. I think basically anything outside of these very clear boundaries or rules are hard. When you think about rigid, so the definition here is like, these are strict rules, they do not change. You don't know why these rules are rules, but they're there and you got to follow them. And then on the other end, you've got these fuzzy rules that are, they kind of seem like they apply one day or 1 week, and then the next week they don't, or they apply to this person and that person. And, you can kind of naturally see why that might cause some frustration. When I was thinking about this, I kept thinking back to as a child. So as a child, we all had rules, and some of those we may not have understood. And that made it hard as a kid. And so when I was a child, or maybe I should say teen, when I saw a rigid or a hard boundary, my first reaction was, well, I'm gonna see what happens. I'm gonna cross that line a little bit. I'm gonna push it, because I didn't understand it. Why is that? It caused this feeling of rebellion. And then with the fuzzy boundaries, again, that can cause confusion because, well, it was okay for me yesterday. Why is it not okay today? And so, as a child, that could cause a lot of rebellion and problems. But as an adult, while it can still cause rebellion, it can also build up resentment. And so, this as an adult, oftentimes in the workplace, can manifest in time like, for example, work time or flex time, and not having clear boundaries and rules around that, or maybe it's a dress code in the office. So these are things that we start to see as we grow up and we enter the workforce, and how they can be a little bit frustrating. Okay, so now let's talk about the importance. So given that we just talked about what frustrates us, and what boundaries are, why is it important to set those boundaries? Why is it important for you to set those boundaries, or to be clear on not only what your own personal boundaries are, but what the boundaries are of others or the workplace might be? And some of you, I'm able to pull the chat now, to protect your time and energy. We're going to talk about that later, because that is absolutely one of those number one reasons why it's important to set those boundaries. And everyone's agreeing, definitely to protect your time and energy, to save yourself, to protect yourself. And then also about other interactions. Someone mentioned that, it's so that they can interact positively and successfully, so that those relationships stay optimal. That, we want to, I think most of us want to have a healthy relationship with those that we work with and those that are in our lives. So those boundaries help that. And the more clear they are, as we just talked about, we'll have the most success, and people will be the most responsive, both in terms of what you can respond to and how people will respond to your own boundaries, and being clear. But sometimes I think that's hard. And it's something that we have to practice. And so sometimes I think, and I'm speaking for myself too here, that we often can wait until we're feeling, resentful, or we're experiencing some kind of physical or emotional reaction. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off that says, okay, I am angry at this person. They are in my space, or I feel violated for this reason, or they don't understand me because of this. And that's when the light bulb goes off of, oh, well, maybe I should set some boundaries around that. Or on the flip side, it's too late and you've already lashed out or shut down. That can sometimes be me. I will maybe shut down at work, and then at home where I'm comfortable, I might lash out at a loved one. So, what if we step back, and what if we were proactive, in establishing those boundaries and communicating those boundaries? How would that look different? How would our lives look different? And I think, like most of you mentioned in the chat, we would probably start to make the most of our time a little bit more. We might start to prioritize things that bring us fulfillment and joy, and hopefully have less stress through that. This was a quote that I found that I just thought fit really well, but it's with what we're talking about today. And it said that boundaries don't exist to limit you. They exist to help you make the most of your life. And I think oftentimes if we think about a boundary, we think about limits. But if we think about it in terms of protection and safety so that we can feel safe and secure and help us prioritize our what's important to us, that's really where we're going to get fulfillment and we're going to make the most of our lives, whether that is at work or at home. And most of these y'all mentioned already, but I'll throw them up here just because it's a cute slide. But these are some reasons why we do want to set those boundaries. And you all said this right away, to practice that self-care, to protect your time, to honor yourself, to communicate what you need. When I was engaged and I was going through the premarital counseling or sessions you have to do, that was communication, and setting boundaries and communicating those boundaries was a big part of that. And I remember at the time, and sometimes I'm still guilty of this, thinking or saying, but my husband should just know, or my fiance at the time should just know that this is important to me, or this is not okay with me, or that I need this or want that. And while I maybe still think that in some cases, if I don't clearly communicate that, there's a breakdown there in that relationship, and it causes strain and it causes stress. So something I have to do is continually learning to practice communication, practice setting those boundaries and communicating those clearly. And that goes for my personal and professional relationships. Someone mentioned this too in the chat about making time and space for positive interactions. Again, we already talked about it, but those boundaries will help set you up for successful relationships, whether it's with your coworker or with a supervisor or manager or department chair, or with just a personal relationship. And then again, it just sets limits in a way that's healthy so that it doesn't start to deconstruct. So even though it seems obvious from what we just talked about that none of us want our boundaries violated, no one likes that, no one wants that. Why is it that we allow it? And why is it that we sometimes choose not to enforce those or uphold our boundaries? And one of the things we're going to talk about later on, but I'll also send it to you in a handout because it is a little more personal, but there is a boundary kind of setting worksheet that I'll be sending you, and it helps you think through some of these things that are most important to you, and helps you think through the steps of setting your own personal boundaries. So again, I don't mean to skip over that, but everyone is going to have, we'll probably have quite a variety of what those things are that are important to us to set. So I'm going to let you all do that post presentation on your own time, and then of course we're here if you guys need any help or have any questions. But as you think about just in your head, what are some of those boundaries that you might have for yourself or that you might want to have? Why is it that we allow it? Why do we not sometimes uphold those things? And the number one challenge across any kind of research or studies you'll do into boundary setting usually is communication. And why is that? It's oftentimes there's this lack of clarity. And I talked about that at the very beginning of the presentation about the stress that people are feeling coming back to work, or back to work as we know it now. It's just lack of knowing what the expectations are, where people are at, not physically where they're at, but just what's allowed. When is it okay to contact someone? When is it not? For the person being contacted, am I feeling stressed that my phone is pinging and my emails are dinging and ringing after 5 o'clock, or am I okay with that? Is it okay to be at home certain days or certain times of the day? So many things. What can I wear in my office now? What can I not? Do I leave my door open or closed? There's so many things that are causing those extra stressors, and even around deadlines. As we look into even pre-pandemic world, there's things that have always existed that can cause stress and barriers to setting up those boundaries. And a lot of times it's just that lack of communication, lack of clarity, and some reasons too that fall under communication. Some of the reasons that we typically choose maybe not to communicate our boundaries to others. Fear is a big one. So it might be fear of rejection or fear of confrontation. That might make someone uncomfortable. We might feel guilt. So, gosh, I'm very lucky. I have a great support team. I have a great supervisor. I have a great job. Um, I really wish this wasn't happening, but I don't want to like rock the boat too much because I should feel grateful. I should feel very lucky for where I'm at. And so I'm just going to kind of continue to allow it. Um, for some of us, we just weren't taught healthy boundaries. It was something that we didn't grow up in an environment that maybe either it was talked about or shown. Um, it may have been something that we didn't learn. It might not be part of our office culture. So sometimes just our personal history and what we bring to the plate can affect us whether or not we communicate those boundaries. And then sometimes there are safety concerns. And for this is something that we won't talk about today, but I think it's important to mention because often this is a boundary or a barrier to setting boundaries. And so sometimes those boundaries need to be set, or you might wish to set those boundaries with someone that you might feel might be physically dangerous or threatening to you. And so you may not feel safe to set those boundaries. And so in that situation, that's where, of course, we would, hopefully encourage you to seek out counselor or therapist, an advocate, someone to kind of who is trained to safely create a plan or create a safe plan for you to execute those boundaries. But oftentimes, again, back to communication, when we don't do this, we tend to bottle it up and it grows and it grows and it grows. And then what happens? We talked about it earlier. We either typically lash out or we shut down. And then that can, again, going into what Amber talked about with us last week, can manifest sometimes with anxiety, depression, despair, and sadness. And I also want to say that it's important to note that it's okay to have stress in the workplace. I don't mean to say that anytime we're feeling this way that something's happened. We don't have a healthy boundary in place, or we are kind of like I think Amber gave the example of like the Price is Right, the mountain climber, and that we've kind of fallen off that mountain, so to speak. We're okay to have stress. It's okay to feel negative emotions, but what we hope at Healthy UNCG and what we hope our programs can help give you some tools and resources is to be able to express them effectively and confidently with people that you trust, whether that's at home or at work. Right. Any questions or anything in the chat that I've missed?
Just some comments about just setting some working boundaries and setting those emails that you are away from the office for these couple of days, and you'll check those emails when you get back to the office. And someone put a great response that says, "I look forward to working with you when I return." I thought that was a great response to those emails where.
Well, this is a perfect lead-in.
Yeah, especially when I'm sure you'll bring this up when we're talking about the something on your calendar.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So this is perfect. I'm so glad that y'all are already like problem solving through this, and giving each other those like tips that work for you or that maybe have worked for a coworker that you might have. And so we're gonna, I wanted to spend the majority of the last half really talking about those strategies. And so this is sort of just a quick list. And again, you'll get a handout with these explained, but then we're gonna kind of go a little deeper into a couple tools that we can give you related to these strategies. And some of these you've already done in the chat, which is really cool. But when we think about establishing those healthy boundaries, one thing that's important to remember, and often hard, is that ultimately it's up to you. We must stay accountable and understand that we can only establish our own boundaries and communicate those to others, or ask for clarity from others if you're not getting it. So we do have some role to play in terms of just looking in the mirror and saying, okay, I am feeling this some kind of way, this feeling. Let's look into the reasons why I might be feeling that. Is it something a boundary that I have not set for myself, or that I've set and not communicated? Or am I needing more clear information from whoever the person is on the other side of that? So, does their boundary seem rigid? Is it fuzzy? How can I make that more clear so that we do have, an optimal relationship? And so, like we talked about earlier, clear communication is typically met with understanding. So whether it's like some of you mentioned, defining what it is your available hours are, setting email limits. For some reason, or not for some reason, in some cases, it's just defining what an emergency is. So this happened in a not it wasn't a UNCG office, but a friend of mine at her work. She said that we were talking about this presentation. We were on a walk the other day, and she said she works in the banking industry, and she said, we'll often say, I'm going to be gone, but if it's an emergency, you can always, call me or contact me, whether it's on vacation or whatever they were doing. And even people's definition of what's an emergency. I mean, what I might think is emergency, someone else might not. So, even asking for more clarity around that can be helpful when it comes to communication. Identifying your priorities. So that by making, I've got on here things like making lists, setting goals. And you might think, well, what does setting goals and having a list have to do with my boundaries or priorities? But when we think about it in terms of a work setting, sometimes, and again, talking to myself here, I can get off track. I am by nature a yes person. I struggle with saying no. I'm a helper by nature. I want to be able to say yes. I want to help. I want to be on this committee and that committee and volunteer, but also do a good job in the role that I was hired for. I want to be there for the students that I teach and I work with. And so sometimes for me, in setting those boundaries might be creating a list, whether that's kind of a broad list of what are my goals for this year, this month, or just what are my list of priorities for the week. That can help keep me focused, and help me realize where I need to say no. It can give me a reason to say no or not right now. It can help me put limits on my time. It can help me communicate better with my supervisor or with those that I work with. So when I say making lists and goals, that's sort of how that falls into it. The other thing is, like, do I need to be overly available? So for some of us, we feel like we need to be available all the time. And going back to that, list of goals or list of priorities, you can kind of take a hard look at that. And, am I the person that needs to be available 24/7? Or how can this be done differently? How can I set those limits, but still let people know that I'm here if they need me during these hours? And here's what you can do if you need me outside of these hours. Basically, when we become comfortable with saying no, which is very hard, I understand, it helps our boundaries stay enforced, and it helps keep boundaries a priority. And I was with a coworker yesterday in our office, and she said, have you ever heard the phrase, no is a complete sentence? And I was like, wow. No, I've never thought about it that way. And I, it's no, I'm sorry, but, or, well, no, I can't right now. And you start to kind of apologize for the reason you're saying no, but that really it's okay. No can just mean no. So just something to think about for those of you that may have a hard time like myself. Kristen mentioned this a little while ago, but I have a story of a woman that I used to work with, and she had a really hard time with overcommitting. That was her kind of struggle area, both professionally and personally. And she made this joke about and now we have virtual calendars. I guess you could do this on a virtual calendar too, but this was when we had like the desk or wall calendars, and she would go through at the beginning of every month when she flipped that page, and she would write the word something on every day, all 30 days or 31 days on that calendar. And we would laugh about it. And we're like, why do you do that? And she said, well, if someone asks me to do something, I can look at my calendar and say, oh, I'm sorry, I have something on my calendar. Can't do that right now. So it was kind of a joke, but also a reminder to herself that it's okay to say no. And for her, it was keeping her honest. She really did have something on her calendar, even though it was just the word something, but it gave her that permission. And sometimes it's just giving ourselves that permission to not be available all the time. So this kind of brings me into taking time off, building in breaks, and taking that time seriously. One of the flip sides to being remote, although I think many might have enjoyed being remote or still are enjoying it, that same Pew Research study found that people who are working remotely actually spend about 49 minutes more working. And I think it's because it's just there, and we can kind of come and go, and it's hard to establish that boundary of, my workday is done or my time is done. Or we may not take those breaks to go chat with a coworker or go have lunch somewhere or just get up and walk around. But like, if you think about it like an athlete, how recovery is essential, that they don't want them training every day. They build in breaks and time off. I mean, they do this because it's essential to their performance, and it's the same for us. So when we're honest and we honor ourselves, it not only helps our own well-being and productivity, but it can also help maybe others in our office that are feeling the same way. Some people really struggle with that, and so I think if you can be an example for someone else, or if you are someone in a leadership position within your department or office, when they see you honoring that time for yourself, they're going to feel more empowered to do the same. So the other things I have on here, connecting with others in your industry. And by this, I just mean sometimes reaching out to someone like another coworker, a mentor, a supervisor, or somebody you trust can help to, talk about like, well, I'm feeling really overloaded and stressed out. I've been asked to do this project. I just don't know if I have the capacity. Have you ever had to say no? Or have you ever had to talk to someone about something that made you uncomfortable within the office? What was that like for you? So having someone that you can trust can help you gain the confidence to establish those boundaries and how to communicate them. We've talked a little bit already about technology and how it can be helpful, it can be harmful, but trying to utilize it in a way that is helpful in terms of silencing notifications. I know some people have said, this was more when we were all working at home, but that they would only do work on their work laptop. So if they were on their phone or on maybe their personal laptop or computer, that's how they kept it separated. It was just like an internal rule they set with themselves. Some people can set alarms or like use their calendar, create blocks of time to work on certain things. Putting things like your personal time throughout the day, maybe scheduling it in the calendar. So there's ways that we can use technology, I think, in a positive way to sometimes help us with creating those boundaries. Conducting a self-inventory. I will be sending you one. There's one by Dr. Jane Bolton. She's a psychotherapist, and she probably has the most utilized healthy boundaries questionnaire out there or assessment. It's 20 questions or 20 statements, and you rate yourself on like an always, sometimes, never scale. And it just gives you an idea of not only whether or not you have healthy boundaries, but it shows you areas in which maybe certain boundaries or certain areas maybe need to be stronger. So I'll send all of that to you. And then of course, asking for help. It's not easy. It's a process. And so whether that means asking for help in the sense of professional therapist, counselor, or again, going to that mentor, that's important. And it's particularly if you're someone like myself who does struggle, who it's not natural to maybe set boundaries in place and stick to them. Having someone there to keep me accountable can really help. All right, so let's go into some of these tools that you guys have already kind of talked about. So for some of us, again, when we're thinking about in the workplace, one of the things that leads to boundaries getting, I think, blurred a little bit, becoming fuzzy, is taking on that role of too much. Or sometimes, taking a break, like we talked about, is not an option. We're in a busy season or in a busy month or busy week, and it's hard to build in those personal breaks or take time off. So learning to triage our tasks can sometimes help with sticking to those boundaries that we've set or priorities that we've set. So this is something called the Eisenhower matrix. It's like a business model matrix some of you may have seen or been familiar with. It's often called the important/urgent matrix, but it's really just a decision-making tool. Again, this will be emailed to you as well, but it helps you make the distinction between what's important, what's not important, what's urgent, and what's not urgent. And this can be done, again, it's oftentimes used in the professional setting, but I think it can be used with your personal life. If you have kids that are a little older, helping them learn how to decide what's important and where priorities are. And it basically just splits the task into 4 boxes, and it helps you prioritize, which tasks we should focus on first, which ones we can delegate, which ones we can probably get rid of altogether. So this is just one tool that we'll be sending to you that's often a good reminder. And if you're someone that likes to make lists or likes to kind of write out things and see them visually, it can help to take that list that you create and then plug it into this matrix and kind of establish where you're at that week or that month and what boundaries are going to be important in helping you accomplish those and be successful. Now, this next kind of strategy we're going to do together as a group. And I've put on here 2 situations that might happen in the workplace. And I want you to just kind of think through, and we can use the chat too if you want. When you experience, we'll start with a tight deadline. When you're given a tight deadline, what types of emotions arise? Like, what do you feel when you get that from, you're in your staff meeting and your boss or your supervisor throws something at you and gives you, by end of the week turnaround, and you already know you have all these other things, plus a doctor's appointment and committee meetings. Good. Okay, so we've got people feeling stressed, anxiety, panic or anxiety, frustration. Good. And then when you're feeling those, and I would say it's the same for me, I feel those things too. Definitely, I get the anxiety, anger. Oh, Kenyon, you took it from me. That's exactly what I was thinking. That ends up manifesting into this anger that I feel inside. I usually don't show it to the workplace, but I'm feeling that inside, that anger. I love it. We've got someone who's got a silver lining. Some people find it a little exciting. They might kind of like it. It's that challenge of, I got to get this done. Who can I pull in? So I love that. I'd love to know what Enneagram number you are. I'm a 2, so I struggle. So yeah, oftentimes it can be more of that negative emotion. So that's, the first thing, and this is again to help us recognize our body and what we're feeling. So these are the emotions we might be feeling. How does your body react to those emotions? So what is happening maybe physically when you find yourself getting panicked, anxiety, anger, or even excited over a tight deadline? Okay, we've got stomach pain. Definitely get the knots in the stomach, GI stuff, shoulders in my ears. So a lot of us, we carry our tension above the shoulders. And so we feel that we're like this and we forget to kind of breathe and lower our shoulders. Our neck might hurt. Our heart rate's increasing. We tense up. So those are the reactions. All right, what are some actions that you do or you could do to help calm you down and prevent that emotion from maybe taking over? Good. So we have meditate. We can breathe, maybe do something that you enjoy, listening to some soothing music, square breathing, which is a breathing technique. I believe that Amber taught us in a session last year, but we can send more information on that if someone's not familiar with it. Getting up, taking a walk. So these are some things that you can do in the moment. Again, if you're in the middle of a meeting, some of these things might need to be things like breathing or taking a little break or doodling, getting energy out. We might not be able to, leave the room at that exact moment. But again, we can start to recognize the emotions, know how they manifest in our body. We can start to train our brain or retrain our brain to do some of the things to help us calm down. And then in thinking back to the strategies that we just talked about, how can some of those help remedy this type of situation, like a tight deadline, before it grows into something bigger? What are some of those things that we talked about on that previous slide? And I can go back to it if it helps. What are some of those things that might help as we experience, the effects of having a tight deadline? Okay, so some of you mentioned going to a trusted coworker, being able to vent, having that person help you think through how to approach this deadline and tackle it, maybe even together. It's a good one. So when we're making lists, setting goals, good. Talk to who gave you that task. So again, that's something that can be uncomfortable, but going to that person afterwards, seeing if it can be pushed out. Could you call in support from someone else? Seeking help, saying no. It's easier to do when you're already at a full capacity. So yes, going back to looking at that list, going back to the something you have on your calendar, learning to be comfortable in the word no, identifying those priorities. So good, these are all things that we can go back to those strategies. Now, for the sake of time, we won't go through this, but this is another big one. Oftentimes, I think, particularly when you're in a university setting, committees are a big part of what we do, even if they were never written in our job description when we took our positions. And if you're like me, there's a lot of committees I want to be on. I would love to be a part of it. However, there's this other part of the job that I was hired to do. So, when you think about getting asked to do something else on a committee, walking through these with yourself, what emotions do I feel? And maybe it is more on the positive. It might be excitement. How does my body react? But then when I'm overwhelmed and it comes time for that committee meeting, and I'm like, oh man, I've got 4 committee meetings plus a staff meeting plus my deadlines. What type of emotions will arise then? So looking through and thinking back to that priority list, back to those goals. Is this committee, is this deadline, is this helping me to achieve my goals? And being able to communicate that and talk clearly with a supervisor around it. So this is just, another situation. There are going to be a couple, again, in the handouts that I send you. Like I mentioned earlier, there was just so much to put in here. So a lot of it you'll be getting in your inbox. But there's a couple of other scenarios, work related, that it will kind of take you through and walk you through. So one of the things that can be helpful, and y'all were already doing this in the chat earlier when we talked, actually you're doing it on your own, I didn't even prompt you, is coming up with that signature phrase. So you'll see the little toolbox here, and any of the slides have the toolbox. This is something that you can use. And so this is one that has helped me. It's kind of like having the something listed on your calendar. A signature phrase is just, first of all, something that feels true and authentic to you. It helps you kind of create this short list of boundary setting phrases or statements that feel right to you. So they feel authentic to you. They feel appropriate in various situations or settings. And the whole purpose is so that you have these phrases or sayings or email responses to go to. You can reach for them without a lot of thought. It helps you to respond after you've found your calm. So in that activity that we just kind of went through quickly, you've identified what are some things that can help me feel more calm. Now here's how I can respond. And so it's having a go-to. So you're not having to think in the moment. You've got these signature phrases that you've already created for yourself that you know will work in the situations. So, and sometimes you can consider things like what has worked for you in the past, or like you all just shared together, some things that you've heard other people use that's worked really well. It doesn't have to be something you create from scratch. But in looking through all these great comments in the chat, and I'm going to actually give you some examples. Let me flip on over to that. It will help you work through those times in which a boundary might have been crossed. So here are some just related to saying no. Thank you for the invitation. I have a prior commitment. That's simple. Like that's not anything, profound. But if we're not used to saying that and we're struggling and I'm like, oh, well, thanks, but I think I have this, and I'm making all these excuses, it can be hard for me to pull from that. So looking and learning that might be my signature phrase when I'm already have too many commitments going on. Sometimes it's a work situation where you may not agree with what someone's saying, and that can be really hard to speak up about. So having a signature phrase such as, I see your point, but I think differently about this. It's respectful, it's appropriate. If that's something that feels authentic to you, using something like that or taking that and tweaking it. This fourth one, I joked because this is one of the boundaries. That's a good boundary, but or that's a good issue to have, but I have trouble setting boundaries around. When being back in the office, I can often get distracted because I'm a people person. I love chatting with people. I love talking with people. And I think that's important. I think that's part of a healthy workplace. However, what I can do is I can spend an hour or two in conversation with someone. All of a sudden, I only have this many hours left in my workday. I come home, I didn't get all my work done. So I'm stressed. I'm lashing out at my family. I've got all this anxiety going into the next day because I was so busy catching up with others. So sometimes I don't balance that as well. So it might be a phrase like, thanks for asking about my weekend. It was great, but I've got to focus on this deadline that's quickly approaching. Let's chat later, or let's do lunch next week. Those, again, are something that's appropriate, not rude, but can help me keep that boundary set for myself. So there's some other ones on here related to uncomfortable conversations in the workplace. Again, you're going to get lots of examples of these. Here are some related more to taking on extra work or setting realistic expectations in similar to the examples we just gave. So, given the quick turnaround time for this project, I'm available or I'm okay to accomplish these two things, but I just don't know if there's enough time to do this as well, with the quality that I want to give to it. Can we bring on others? Can we push it back longer? Can we reassess this item that needs to be done? Or I'm happy to help with this project if this other thing can be deprioritized so I can focus a little bit better. And then this last one makes me think about the committee example that we talked about a minute ago. But whether it's a committee or a meeting, oftentimes meetings just get thrown on our calendar. So learning how to respond in a way that honors our boundaries, such as, hey, I just saw your meeting invitation. Is there a chance that we can push it back? I normally take a lunch break during that time, and that break helps me feel more energized so I can focus better on our meetings. So just having, again, those signature phrases that you can go to can help alleviate some of the stress that we might feel in coming back to the workplace and having those boundaries that aren't as maybe clear as they once were. These are some other examples I mentioned earlier that you'll get in the handouts in your email. But these are just other examples, such as the tight deadline or being asked to be on a committee. These are other examples for you to think through whenever you have the time, if you want to. And it will give you some signature phrases to practice with also. Okay, we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to kind of jump to our summary slide, and we can answer questions or talk through the chat too. But just some tips. When we think about, or when we identify a need for a boundary, whether that's a personal boundary that we need to set for ourselves, or if we need clarity on a boundary within with a coworker or a supervisor in an office setting, making sure that we are clear, we're calm, and we're firm. You're respectful, and really doing it in as few words as possible. That's going to help with that clarity. About 30 minutes ago, we were talking about what types of boundaries are that we respond best to. And all of you want to ask what was most frustrating. You either said those boundaries that are really fuzzy or the ones that are super rigid and you don't understand it. But no one mentioned that clear boundary that even if you may not agree with it, you understand why it's there. So again, going back to being as clear as you can with communicating your own personal boundaries and needs. And learning not to apologize, that you don't need to apologize for setting that boundary. This can be hard to think about, but you or we or I'm not responsible for the other person's reaction to that boundary that we're setting. And I think that's hard. That's hard to think about. That's hard to say sometimes. But when we think about it, it's not being mean or ugly. It's just that you're only responsible for communicating your boundary in a respectful manner. And so if it upsets them, then that is a problem that they will need to either come to you and ask for clarity or reasons, or that they're going to have to work out. And sometimes I think for some people, especially those that are accustomed to sometimes having more control, whether it's in a workplace setting or a personal setting, or maybe being more manipulative, it can test you. I mean, that's very hard with people who are good at that. But when we plan for it, we utilize some of these tools, we can expect it, and it can help us to remain firm. And with that, I put another bullet point in here about not letting our negative emotions stand in the way. You might feel guilty, you might feel selfish, you might feel embarrassed to have those conversations or set those boundaries and be clear with them. But we have to remind ourselves that we have a right to feel this way. We have a right to honor ourselves and our self-care and our time. And so, trying not to let anxiety, fear, guilt prevent us from taking care of ourselves. And then we talked about this earlier again, but I just want to reiterate, creating a support system. So who are those people who do respect your boundaries, and who are those people who don't? And how can we work on communicating or eliminating those toxic people from our lives, and those that do want to control or manipulate or abuse? Or in the workplace setting, who can we go to that's a trusted individual that can help us, work through maybe people that we interact with that don't honor our boundaries. And then lastly, just to summarize, is reminding yourself that this is something, this whole healthy boundaries idea, communicating it, honoring it, sticking to it, not letting other people violate it. This takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of practice and an awful lot of determination. It's a process. I think it comes easier to some than others. So setting them in your own time frame, not just because Stephanie came on here today and told you it was important, but figuring out what that time frame is and relying on those strategies for support can help you be the most successful in these situations that oftentimes maybe can feel uncomfortable. So these are just some of the references that we use today, but I'll also be sending you a slew of handouts and resources so that you can look further into it. If this is something that's important to you or that you want more practice with, there's also consultants, people at UNCG that can help work teams work through establishing healthy boundaries. Healthy Relationships Initiative is on our campus. They're really great at having trainings and workshops to help kind of take a deeper dive, especially in the professional setting. But reach out to us either on the website or in our email. If you do have questions or you have, I don't know, just thoughts about this or you need some extra help, we'd be happy to kind of help refer and walk you through some of that. So are there any questions about today or any kind of last thoughts? Or anything in the chat that I've missed? Been doing an awful lot of talking, so I haven't had a chance to look. Yes. Okay. So someone mentioned, some things can be cultural too. And I think that's something that was not mentioned. Again, we were looking at an overview, but in the workplace. So the way that some people either establish boundaries, have boundaries, communicate them, what might be important to some and another can be oftentimes cultural. And so again, back to communication, like learning more about the people that we work with and interact with and what is important to them, and maybe just asking the question of why that is in a respectful way, that can help to educate us more on why we might feel this way or why it's uncomfortable for me. And we talked about that earlier, that personal history, kind of where we came from, how we were raised, our backgrounds, our cultures, those play a big part into how we feel about setting boundaries, how we feel when those are violated, how we feel about communicating them. So I'm glad that was brought up since it wasn't formally in the presentation. So let's see. And yes, we could probably do lots of sessions. We could probably do some deeper dives. So we may add that in as we go forward into next semester. And yes, we do have consultants. There's people at UNCG that can help with this. We have through the Team Quest program, there are trained facilitators that can help with communication and boundary setting. So they sort of have a menu of workshops that they can do. And a lot of times we think of Team Quest as Piney Lake and doing ropes courses and trust falls. They also do more in-office kind of dynamic type training. So if you want information about that, let me know. And they actually have a new facilitator, and I think they've changed a few things since COVID. At one point, they weren't operating and doing things like that at all, but I think they're back to doing some of that now. So they do have a fee, but it is a lower, it's less expensive, or the fee is lowered for an in-house UNCG group. So I think a lot of us picture the ropes courses, when we think about Team Quest, but they do have trained facilitators that help with strategic planning. And then, like I said, communication and boundaries is a big piece of what they do that's a lot of us just don't know about. All right, well, we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to thank all of you for being with us today, working through some of the technical difficulties I had in the first few minutes of the program, but we appreciate your time. Next week, Dr. Ann Brady will be here, and she will be talking about movement, and not just like, let's get out and exercise and go lift weights in the gym, but functional movement. So what are things, she calls it mobility snacks, I think is what it's like. You eat a snack throughout the day to keep you fueled. Movements that you can do throughout your day to help reduce tension, stress, to keep you active, to keep the blood flowing. So she'll be talking about the importance, but also showing and visually demonstrating some of those. So it's same link. You can use the same link that you joined this week on to join next week. And so we hope we see you. And if not, we'll have those recordings up on our website for you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Hi, everyone.